All right, guys, we're back again. This is episode 10 of We Are Judging You. Today we have some very interesting topics to discuss. Number one, the Texas redistricting that has been undertaken by the governor and others to redistrict 5 districts in Texas, congressional districts, been counteracted by the state of California, great state of California. Um, those maps were initially declared potentially violative of the federal constitution, but now, late over the weekend, the Supreme Court has weighed in to stay the lower court's order. So now these maps, which were in play, they were taken out of play for a few days, and now they're back in play potentially. So my understanding, I haven't read the Supreme Court's order, but it's a temporary order, but it stays the lower court's order. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're also going to talk about um, the labeling of a few groups in Texas as being quote unquote terrorist organizations by the state's governor, such that they cannot own property in the state of Texas. Group called CAIR, CAIR. And Murtaza will get it all into what they do, the wonderful work really that they do. And I believe the other group is the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been labeled. But this could just be a start. I think these are just sort of exemplars of what could be to come in the future. We'll talk about what are the implications for Texans, and what are the implications, for you guys out there. But the first thing about the maps, I mean, I've said it before on episode 2 or 3. Um, when you really dug down and looked at what was going to happen to stop after Texas Democratic lawmakers left to go to other Democratic strongholds like Chicago, New York, California, then suddenly came back. Then a vote was called. What was the real legal plan to to invalidate the maps? And I've said that. I said it then, and I'll say it again. There. In my mind, there just was no real legal plan. The real plan needed to be political and political only. And it seems like um, what the real plan was disappear long enough for California to kind of get its act together, so that it could gerrymander some of its own districts and then come back to Texas because nothing was going to stop the maps. It was a little bit of a shocker that an intermediate appellate court found a constitutional violation, and basically said these maps can't go forward. You've got to have the 2026 election based on the 2021 maps, not the 2025 maps. Now, the Supreme Court has come in and said, nope, 2025 maps are going to be in play, at least for now. And so, so I guess, what's the libertarian view on all this?
Yeah. So I mean, so it was interesting. So last week, the federal judge panel, I think out of El Paso, 3 judges, two trial court judges, and one appellate judge, Smith, Jerry Smith of the Fifth Circuit, who we'll talk about in a second, Judge Jeff Brown, Galveston Division, and the third judge, I believe, out of El Paso, right? I think it's one of the sitting judges in El Paso. Anyway, so in a vote 2-1, they invalidated the latest maps that have been drawn up this summer after all the hoopla about the Democrats disappearing out of Texas, the House of Representatives, and they sort of disappeared all over the country, came back. So at the end of that, the next special session that had been called, finally the bill got passed through. So it looked like the Republicans were going to get about 5 more seats based on these redistricting. It was not for sure. There were some, issues regarding, some, in southern Texas, the border, which is a little bit unpredictable with the high Latino vote, whether they were going to support Trump or not, and basically support the Republicans in the midterms. But those were thrown out by this panel. However, immediately with an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, Ken Paxton's office, in record time, I was reading some press from them, appealed, and Judge Alito, who sits over the Fifth Circuit, granted the administrative stay. So technically, at this time, The maps are still in play. However, there's no election that's happened, and it remains to be seen. Briefing has been done on a very expedited basis. The plaintiffs were largely minority and democratic leaning groups and individuals have today this afternoon they have to file their response to the stay request and a few other items. It's been done on an expedited schedule, which again, as we've seen, the U.S. Supreme Court has been taking up these very political topics in a very rush basis, mainly because the time to sign up for the primaries is coming December 8th, I believe, is the deadline, or very soon. And if they miss the deadline, then you won't know who's running in the primaries and so forth. So that should happen. I think month of December, we should have sort of a view from the U.S. Supreme Court whether the Texas redistricting maps will hold or not. And let's talk about that. So George, what do you think will be the outcomes? U.S. Supreme Court, let's say, assume takes up the case, and given recent jurisprudence, which you've talked about, what do you think happens in that scenario?
So it used to be states that have historically been found to have created laws or policies um, that discriminate against minority voters. Those states used to have to pre-certify before um, before they did any kind of change to their maps.
And those are the southern states, right?
Right.
Primarily.
Southern states, I
Right.
think they had to go to DOJ,
Right.
get a pre-certification. These are the new maps we want. Then if they got that, they could move forward. If they didn't, and they tried to move forward, all kinds of issues would arise for them, right? Um, that's not so anymore.
And that was a Roberts Court that got rid
Yeah,
of that, right? The pre-certification
right.
process, right?
That process was extremely important because it operated as a check on things that have historically disenfranchised insular minorities, things like poll taxes, things like having to take some kind of a test before you can exercise your right to vote, um, intimidation tactics, all these things that were utilized and perfected in the southern states against the black vote or the minority vote now, because it's more than just black people who are affected now. But then the black vote, this pre-certification process was put into play. And I think it was a manifest error because I'm judging after the fact. I'm Monday morning, literally it's Monday morning and I'm quarterbacking the situation. The pre-certification process could have fixed all this for a lot less money than is I'm sure is being spent in time, expense, and attorney's fees litigating it out in court. Okay. But I also think that if the Supreme Court just last week can get up at midnight and make an order regarding SNAP benefits, to justify a freeze on SNAP benefits, if it can get up for something like that, I think that the justices will definitely get up for something like this when you're talking about something really just as important, if not more important, which is your
Right.
right to vote. Right? You don't have a constitutional right to a SNAP benefit,
Right.
but you
Right.
do have a right to vote. So I just think that we had a process in play. Um, we made, whether it was intentional or um, through accident, the process is now it's going to be judges. It's three judges at the federal level, and then it's nine at the Supreme Court level. So you've got 12 people who are making decisions for 30, 40 million in Texas right now.
Well, I mean, but the impact of this could be whether the House is remains under a very slight red minority, right, with a Republican minority, or flips, right? Because that's the other part of this is that while it has a huge impact, yeah, you're right, Texas population 30-40 million, but there are a lot more people affected if it affects the outcome of the play of the House. And we talked about the 5 seats that the Texas Republicans were going to sort of put in the favor to help broaden that very narrow majority. But then the counter was that just earlier this month, Governor Newsom of California pushed through Proposition 50, which was going to give redistrict California and change the way that they were going to do this and make it less independent, right? So they have a potentially 5 seats coming that way for the Democrats. I mean, if this plays out, that might and the California redistricting initially was seen to be contingent on what uh, Texas was going to do, but then I think at the end they actually took it out. So if this stands, the overturned maps in Texas, so you don't get the net 5, right?
Right.
Plus you do not get the 5, and the Democrats get the 5, which they're relying on in California. Potentially, that's a 10-seat swing in favor, and that's enough to turn the House.
Could be.
Right, so that
Yeah.
goes from being House Speaker Johnson to now being House Emeritus, right, Speaker, just like how Pelosi is.
House Speaker, what, Jeffries? Is that what we're looking at?
It looks like possibly we may have our first African American speaker, right? I mean,
Okay.
if it holds up.
Yeah.
Now Jeffries, has his own primary kind of challenge, and Mumbani actually is funny. Stood in his favor and said, "Please do not primary him with a more Democrat socialist." Last week, if you saw that small article that happened, so Jeffries should be able to stick it out, and he might become the new House Speaker. Again, seeing how this all plays out. I think there's going to be a mid-term sweep. Looking at what happened earlier this month, I think whether Texas stays or not, I think there's going to be a blue wave, right? I think
Could be another
2026.
blue
Yeah,
wave.
it's going to be a blue wave. Everyone's upset about the chaos, being created by this administration.
Well,
Prices
and things have become less affordable.
exactly,
And that is not all one president's fault or another
right,
president's fault.
right,
That these are really market forces. These are interest rate forces. This has to do with the Fed. This has to do with monetary policies that actually dictate to the Fed what its policy should be. And to a certain extent, prices were going to go up anyway, in my opinion, IMO. However, there have been other things at play that the president has done, like his
right,
tariff policy, which is more of an immediate kind of an acute effect on pricing.
right,
Okay, and I think as things are less affordable, people always blame who they see. Who do they see every day? We
right,
see the president every
right,
day.
right,
We see the majority every day. That's
right.
who they're going to blame no matter what. So
Yeah,
I think there's going to be, and I never thought, you know, the big issues on the ballot would be you have LGBTQ rights, you have abortion rights. I never thought affordability would actually be a
right.
campaign. That's now sort of like a campaign
Right.
slogan now.
But that
That's
should
an
be
issue.
and that should be really the heart of the matter for the middle class and the working class. I mean, that is the issue, right? I mean, how do you afford to live in this country? And all all the other social issues. I think many times are distractions. I mean, they're important, to their constituents, obviously, but they are distractions from something that affects all. But going back to this, so my prediction is when it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, so there are two thoughts, right? One is the reasoning that this panel used to overturn the maps, which Judge Jerry Smith was very vocal about. In fact, all the all the legal publications on Thursday and Friday were saying this may be one of the most unhinged dissents that they've read. But I think he took a playbook because he was on the 3-judge panel back in 2011. Very similar outcome that came out where he had a very vocal dissent, maybe not as extreme as this one, where he accused another judge of being misconduct and not giving him the time to read the majority opinion. And and again, and he was like, the interest of time, it's not on me that it delayed, but there was a rush to get out the opinion of and a few other tidbits that he had. But I think his highlight was, I mean, I think what this all started, ironically, because DOJ sent a letter to Governor Abbott in the very early part of the summer that says, look, based on the outcome of a recent Supreme Court case, right, that using race in any way or trying to protect these coalition is a form of racial discrimination here against white Americans. And you need to fix it. So that letter did mention that race was a reason for setting these uh, these districts, and it needs to be remedied. So I think that's what Judge.
But everybody forgets, like, why were race based districts created in the first place. It was because minorities were being excluded from having a voice. Like that was the initial reason. They have no voice. So the way the districts used to be drawn is no matter where black folk live, they would draw it in such a way so that there were slightly more white folk in that district, so that when the elections happened, it didn't matter what the black voice wanted, what black politics wanted. It didn't matter because regardless of where you lived, your map was drawn in such a way so that majority white would dominate that district. That's why this was created in the law in the first place.
Right, but many years ago, many
But show
decades
me,
ago.
no, this was like 50s and 60s weren't
I mean
that
that.
was not that
I mean,
long
but
ago.
that's another. I mean, that's another time as far as U.S. politics goes. Right? I get it. It happened, right? And I think that's what the. And I think that goes to your point, right? The Justice Roberts, what he really wants is to remedy these 50s and 60s and 70s kind of like race, protective things that were there. And I'm not saying. Again, we've talked about in the past. I'm not saying all those conditions and whatever effects were there are gone.
I'm all for remedying it, but there was a lot of data that went into making those
Right.
decisions in the first place.
Right.
And what I don't see is where's the data that says the harm has been removed conclusively. It's just this opinion that we live in the digital age, therefore there can be no more racism, there's no more discrimination. Look, you have a few minorities now who we look on TV, we see they're rich. That must mean discrimination is gone. So why do they
Right.
need to be protected anymore?
No, I mean,
But
look,
that's not based
yeah,
on data.
yeah, but I don't think the Court's jurisprudence on Voting Rights Act and all that has really looked at the harms, right? They're saying this is a principle, racial benefits should be no longer in the law. Need to get it rid of. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out because one of the justifications that the panel used was the majority opinion was DOJ mentioned race was a reason, and by telling Texas to redistrict to remove race, look, you mentioned race again, right? So it's like this. I think it's a catch-22, right? I think it does. I mean, where else are you going to get a clear racial animus? And we have this issue in cases, right? To prove clear racial animus and mistreatment, nobody ever writes down I'm doing this because of your race, right? They always will find pretext and all that. But the majority opinion here picked up on that letter that the DOJ had sent and said, look, you only redistricted this time because of race. Now, whether the thing that'll be interesting to see is that enough for the Roberts Court to sort of keep the peace, right? And say, you know what, this is justification. We've never seen it. This is an anomaly. This is a DOJ overstepped and shouldn't have said this, but it is what the evidence is there. The flip is why were they fixing the racial? But I think it goes to the heart of what the Roberts court has been doing is getting rid of these racial quote unquote preferences, right? So I see it there. I think that's one outcome that depends on if they want to follow their cases where they're removing these racial preferences, which they've been doing consistently for the last 5 to 10 years, right? Especially now that they have a super majority, right, at the Supreme Court level. I think, interestingly enough, my prediction is, and this may be conspiracy theory, is I think the Supreme Court is now fed up with all branches of government being under one person, right? One control, one party control, and really pushing the envelope on the independence of the judiciary. And I think, depending on how they play this out, it might be enough to again come back to that hard issue, which is keep the House a split Congress, right? Which basically means that you have
So go for the Democrats
it's
or
not going for the
go for
Democrats.
the
It's the lesson,
nonprofits in this
right? Because
one.
right now the executive is ascendant and has been pushing, the shutdown and tariffs and everywhere that the president is the executive, the sole one who can make all decisions, right, and implement whatever he feels to be appropriate. And the Congress has generally been going along by doing nothing, but going along with that, right, and not really pushing back and doing anything. And it's been up to the judiciary to sort of make a judgment call, right, where they go for it. So I think if they come out, the outcome of this could be, while the judiciary is historically not a political branch and all that, they do try to protect their independence and their power, right? So I feel like if they do it and they have a split Congress, I think then that means the executive is going to have to battle the House, right, with impeachments and investigations and so forth, and then maybe it lessens their power. It's just my theory, but I don't think they're going to overtly come out and say that because they're supposed to be non-political.
I just don't know if there is enough momentum behind bucking the current administration's stated wishes, which the current administration is um, it's no stranger to hear exactly what it is the president wants to happen. Okay, in certain situations, so it's going to take a essentially a modern day suitor to break with the administration. It's a 6-3 majority now. And based on the six that are currently appointed by a Republican president or appointed by this particular president, I don't know who is going to break with his policy over Texas voting maps.
Right.
You know,
And it'll require two to break, right? So
at
it'll be
least two. Yep.
now, ironically,
Yep.
because of the way that it's come out of the three judge panel, I think that a four, even if it splits in a way of a 4-4-1 or something like that, right? You could have some really weird, dissents and consent. We know probably the three Democratic appointed justices are going to vote, to keep, no, not to reverse, right, and keep the finding, and then that sort of plays out. I don't think Alito and Thomas are going to, are going to, they're going to find any way to overturn it, right? Which means you go back to validating the redistricting. So I think the play is, yeah, it's a three Trump appointees plus Justice Roberts. I could see this being a 5-4 opinion. I could see that happen. And it'll be interesting to see the briefing, and who is arguing for the Dems at the Supreme Court level. At the Texas side is definitely going to be the new Solicitor General coming in. He was recently appointed at the AG, so he's going to be arguing it. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And it's going to be a very short briefing, so we should have an answer. I believe a decision before December 8th. I think if it goes beyond that, it's going to be interesting to see that we may have a delayed primary election at the Texas state level, right? So those are in March,
Mhm.
and those might be delayed further until May or June.
Which I would prefer.
Yeah,
Yeah, March is just such a tricky month.
right,
And Texas is kind of weird in that way. Typically, the general election will be in November. The primaries are mid to end March normally. There's just this huge gap here, which I guess candidates use to raise money and do what they
right,
need to do.
right.
But things have become so polarized here. I went yesterday to the Museum of Fine Arts. They did a show, a movie that featured the life of Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, first African American female elected to Congress, and she came right here from Houston, right out of the 18th congressional district, which is under attack right now. Right, so it's very
Who holds her seat now?
um,
Is it
no, now it was Sheila Jackson Lee. Then it was Sylvester Turner. Well, first it was Craig Washington. Then it was Sheila Jackson Lee. Then it was Sylvester Turner, who passed away. Then now it's vacant, and that's what I think the governor may be able to appoint someone to close out the term, or
no?
there
There's a
might need to be
runoff.
an
There's
election.
a
Yeah,
runoff, and
there's an
then
election
yeah,
between Amanda
right,
Edwards and
correct.
County
Christian
Attorney
Menifee.
Christian
Yeah,
Menifee right
right.
now. Okay, that's what's going on right now to complete the unexpired term. And then there needs to be a whole nother election, which could be under another map. Okay. Which is going to be a lot harder to win. Okay. Which is on purpose. So this is a historic seat. And I think when she went to the House, there were only a handful of other uh, black Congress people. Like Charlie Rangel in New York. But New York was even back then so blue um, that most of the folks from Texas were not black. Okay, and we're one of the largest states by population. And so she goes there, and the movie is about her early life. It's about some of the things that she supported um, while she was a congresswoman, helping to get Jimmy Carter elected, and then wanting to become the United States Attorney General in his administration. That didn't happen. She ended up resigning or not running for an additional elective term and became a professor at the University of Texas. Okay. And she just did a lot of amazing things. Um, but her district is literally one of the main districts that's part of this redistricting effort. It's been targeted by the governor, who's targeted other people, which segues into the next point is